You're listening to the We Are Libertarians podcast network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com.
Lowe's knows how to help you get the most out of your store run. That's why members save more with My Lowe's Rewards. Earn points towards My Lowe's money on eligible purchases. Get access to member-only deals and free member gifts. Plus, unlock free standard shipping when you reach Silver Key status. So what are you waiting for? Join for free today. Lowe's. We help. You save. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. Details at lowes.com/terms. Subject to change.
You know what's smart? Enjoying a fresh gourmet meal at home that you didn't have to cook. Meet Factor, your loophole in the laws of mealtime. Chef-crafted meals delivered with a tap, ready in just 2 minutes. You know what's even smarter? Treating yourself without cheating your goals. Factor is dietitian approved, chef prepared, and you plated. Pretty smart, huh? Refresh your routine and eat smart with Factor. Learn more at factormeals.com.
Before we start, I want to thank all of the Weird Libertarians patrons for being a part of the show. You can find out all of the benefits of subscribing on Patreon at joinwalplus.com. That's WAL+.com. You'll get bonus content, access to the complete archives. There's over 1,000 shows that you can't get in the public feed, and you'll be supporting all of our great shows. Thank you especially to our $100 a month members, John Pusilo, Vincent Peichel, Lars Nordskog, Jake Edel, Matthew Durbin, Reinhold, Christy Avery, and Jason Doolittle. We also want to thank our main sponsor for this episode. It is Iconic Insurance. 15% of Americans are left to find health insurance on their own. And even if you get health insurance from your employer that doesn't work for you, Matt Allen and Iconic Insurance can help you find the right insurance. Just head over right now and contact him at iconic-insurance.com/libertarians. We'll put the link in the description if you can't remember that. But Matt is a longtime listener of this program and a great guy and a good friend of mine. So please go support him and reach out right now. Thank you. And now let's get started with our show. You're listening to the We Are Libertarians podcast network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com. Welcome to the Chris Spangle Show. Thank you so much for joining me here on the program today. We have a very interesting program about water conservation and something that's happening in Utah in the Salt Lake, at the Great Salt Lake, And my guest is Micah Safsten, who works as a communications and outreach coordinator at the Utah Water Research Laboratory. He is also a contributor for Young Voices, where he writes about natural resources policy and water in the West, and his views do not necessarily represent those of his employer. Micah, I'm very excited to talk to you today about your article. It was sent to me by our friends at Young Voices. It was an op-ed in the Salt Lake Tribune about the Great Salt Lake. It's like a tongue twister for my Hoosier tongue, excuse me. And proper incentives. And let's start with you. Tell me how you got in the water game. I wouldn't think that researching water would maybe be something you went to school for, but why does that interest you, and how did you get into this?
Well, that's a good question. You inadvertently mentioned the Great Lakes, which is actually where I grew up. I grew up in Michigan, surrounded by the Great Lakes, and now I live fairly close to the Great Salt Lake. I got started in water in 2015. I got a job as a young man with very little idea what I wanted to do with my life, working for a local water company here in Utah. In fact, the town that I live in now, and just basically as a laborer and driving dump trucks and reading water meters. And that was where I first became exposed to the issue of water in the West. I had never understood water as something that could ever be scarce. I had always turned on my tap, and water had always come out my entire life. And I'd only just recently moved to Utah, and I came to understand that here in Utah, people there is a special concern because it is in short supply around here. And that was really where it all started. I eventually went back to school and wanted to study political science. I loved to write. And began getting internships in congressional offices and state legislature, working with legislators who were very concerned about this issue. And I would think to myself, "Oh, that's funny. I used to work for this local water company," and I began seeing how this issue is something that affects us every day here out west. It's an everyday concern. We see our rivers getting lower. We see the Great Salt Lake when we drive by it. When we fly into Salt Lake City, we see how the lake is receding, and we even sometimes see the dust that the lake exposed lake bed is blowing into the air. And so it's becoming less abstract. Seemingly every year, it becomes less of an abstract issue as it starts to become more of a real thing. And this is especially true for those who farm, who grow, and need that water to make a living. They see the water in their ditch running through their field. They see it running low. It's not abstract at all. So it's become not just a very interesting issue, but I think one that is actually very important and actually I think for me just I derive a great amount of satisfaction thinking and reading and writing and learning about this very important issue.
Just be careful. Your mic's rubbing on your shirt a little bit.
Sorry.
No, you're good. I mean, you as a Michigander, me as a Hoosier, we understand what it's like just to sort of always have water, and irrigation's not a problem, and we have a healthy water table and a lot of rain. And to be honest, here in Indiana, it didn't hit our radar that Lake Mead, for instance, was going down until, the mob's bodies started showing up. And then all of a sudden, I started watching this YouTube channel of two fishermen who were kind of documenting that drop in Lake Mead and just a couple of regular guys kind of showing this precipitous, quick drop over the summer in Lake Mead. And obviously you're talking about the Great Salt Lake, which I was not even aware that there was an issue with that lake dropping. What is causing water tables to drop with these great lakes, these gigantic lakes in the American Southwest to drop? What is causing it?
Well, it kind of depends on the lake. The Great Salt Lake, the water leaves the Great Salt Lake primarily through evaporation. That's really the only way it leaves the lake. And so what is causing it to the levels to decrease is that there is less water flowing into it. And really that is the one cause that is contributing to all of these decreasing lake levels. And in the Great Salt Lake, that is primarily due to human use. However, drought is also a big part of it. And there's kind of those two things play off of each other. And when you're looking at more like Lake Mead or Lake Powell, which are the two large reservoirs on the Colorado River, those are reservoirs where water flows out of them past the Glen Canyon and then later the Hoover Dam. And so those lake levels are low because of drought. There's less, the Colorado River is low. Those lakes are low because the Colorado River is low. And then we are, releasing most of that water down past the dam or dams. And so the drought and human use are the two primary reasons. There's not much we can do about the drought, but there's a lot we can do about human use.
So give me a size and scope of the problem in the American Southwest as a whole before we talk about specifically conservation with the Great Salt Lake. Is it, if you live in Southern California, should you have a go bag and dig up your silver in the backyard? Is it that dire? Or, with some smart steps, we can make this manageable for people in Arizona, Colorado, Utah?
So just generally speaking, it is very dire. I'm not going to recommend anyone, bury their wealth in their backyard just yet. But I would say that the primary concern on the Colorado River is Lake Powell and the Glen Canyon Dam. The Glen Canyon Dam is the major dam upstream of the Hoover Dam, and it's in southern Utah and right along the Arizona-Utah border. And it generates electricity mostly for northern Arizona and a lot of the Navajo reservation. And that is a real concern because as the lake levels decrease, the dam's ability to generate hydroelectric power is compromised. And that is increasingly looking like something that very well could happen within the next year. It really depends on the snowpack for this year. How much snow is going to fall in Colorado, Wyoming, and to a lesser degree Utah, because that is the snow that melts, then goes down the mountains and into the Colorado River. So that is pretty serious. That would mean a significant increase in the cost of electricity in those areas. But then agriculture is also a major concern, and that is more of a concern in Southern California because as the river levels are so low, there's just less water to go around for everyone. And Southern California agriculture is a huge user of that water. They are the biggest user of Colorado River water is Southern California ag. And so we're just looking at a situation where they have to conserve. They have to make major cuts. We're talking cuts of 50%, which is massive. And
I read an article that in LA, for instance, 30% of the water is used for golf courses. And so they're trying to build sustainable golf courses that match the climate as opposed to trying to have lush green grass at every hole.
That's right. I'm a little surprised at that 30% number. It is very high, though. It is, in Southern California, Arizona and Utah, and Nevada. It's that's the lower Colorado River Basin, and they use significantly more water than the upper Colorado River Basin.
So let's talk about your article, which will be in the show notes, and it's titled "Proper Incentives Will Save the Great Salt Lake, Not the Public Trust Doctrine." Give us a little bit for those of us who are geographically challenged and maybe haven't seen the Great Salt Lake or learned about it since third grade. What is it? Where is it located? And what's happening with it that it needs to be saved?
Sure. So the Great Salt Lake is located in northern Utah. It's right next to Salt Lake City, obviously. It is very close to most of Utah's population center. That is what we call the Wasatch Front. It's where about 75% of the population of Utah lives within, I would say, probably an hour's drive, or maybe an hour and a half's drive from the shores of the Great Salt Lake. And so the Great Salt Lake is unique in that it is a terminal lake. That is that no water runs out of it. The only way water leaves is evaporates, like I mentioned earlier. And what that means is that any nutrient or any substance, any sediment that flows into it stays there forever. And that includes salt. That's why the lake has such high salinity levels. But it also includes toxins, any trace chemicals, any trace material, metals, arsenic, any of that flows into the lake from industrial activity, anything else, is going to stay in the lake forever. So as the lake levels decrease, as the lake dries up, then those toxins are left behind, and they are left behind in the lake bed. And
they get concentrated, right?
That's right. And they eventually, that lake bed dries, and those toxins are basically turned into dust, and that dust gets into the air. And that these toxic, air quality concerns have been well documented along the Wasatch Front, along in the area of the Great Salt Lake. And as the lake continues to dry up, those toxins will only increase, that they will only become more prevalent in the air. And we've seen this in other parts of the world. What makes the Great Salt Lake unique is that there's so many people that live near it. We're talking a couple million people that live near the Great Salt Lake. It is a huge environmental concern. It's in crisis level. And when you come here to Utah and you talk about some of the things Utahns are concerned about, that is getting increasingly high on the list, as it should be. And so there's been a lot of discussion about how do we fix this? And the easiest, most obvious answer is to get water back in the lake, which means we need to conserve water. Now, there's other ideas too. There's talk of piping water from the Pacific Ocean and other things like that, which are far-fetched, to say the least.
Yeah, you got to build a pipeline, right? Which brings all kinds of concerns, like we see with the pipeline in South Dakota, for instance.
That's right, and I mean, at least it would have water or salt water instead of gas, but you do have to pump it. You have to pump it over the Sierra Nevada mountains, which is,
and I would think that you'd add a lot of bacteria and salt, which maybe the salt kills the bacteria, but that would offset maybe the natural balance of it. Yep. So do the people around the lake use the water for, you say nothing comes out, meaning it's not attached to a river. Is it filled with runoff from snow in the mountains, and then that's how it fills up, and then is it drained using for commercial water, essentially? I don't know how would you phrase that, water that you use?
Yeah, so there are three major rivers that flow into the Great Salt Lake, and all three of them are rivers that flow from the mountains in this area. Two of them from the Wasatch Mountains, and then a third that's from both the Uinta and Wasatch Mountains. And so, this is all snow runoff that melts, and then it flows into the lake. The problem is that we use that water before it gets to the Great Salt Lake. We use a great deal of it. It's our drinking water. It is the water we grow crops with. It's used in industrial processes and mining, and that means there's less water that goes into the lake. The more we use.
Okay, so I'm completely ignorant of that concept. How do we take water out of the rivers to use it other places? Like, I mean, in my mind, in my cartoon brain, there's like a giant funnel that a farmer just stuck into the river. How do you extract water from a river and then port it over to become, water? Just give me like a basic tutorial of how that works.
Sure. So it's a series of canals, and so we build canals that turn into irrigation ditches, and really the big user is agriculture, right? So it's something like 63%, I think, is the number. 63% of the water in the Great Salt Lake watershed is used for agriculture. And so I should say the diverted water, the water that we take out of the rivers. So when we divert water, we build a canal, and it just flows into the canal. Some of it flows into the canal rather than staying in the riverbank. And so that kind of it becomes a network of canals that go to each individual field and farm, and then that is basically we need ways to keep track of this water. We meter it, and we're doing a better job of that, of metering this water, of knowing where it's going, how much is going where, and then it's used, that is primarily how it would be used for agriculture. When you're looking at more like municipal use, like the water that comes into your house, in the Intermountain West, we primarily use groundwater, and so it's a well, and so we're digging wells and water is coming up through the well. But that is still the same water that ultimately would go to the rivers anyway. We're just kind of catching it earlier in that case. So we're digging a well, often high in the mountains, and then that water is instead of coming in through a canal or a river, it's coming in through pipe, and we'll treat it, and then it comes to our house.
So essentially, the conversation about the Great Salt Lake is using less of the water from the rivers so it fills more. And what is being proposed? What is the prevailing proposal? Because I'm guessing it's probably a bad idea. And then we'll talk about your solution on the other side.
Right. Well, there's a few ideas. And the case I would make would actually be that in the case of Utah, we're more and more implementing the good ideas. What I was responding to in this article was actually a proposal that I think has been around longer, and you also see more often outside of Utah, and that is basically it's eminent domain for water. And it's the idea that water, like any other natural resource, like land or wildlife, belongs to the public, and therefore the public, through the government, has the right to regulate it. And I don't think that necessarily follows, but even if it did, it would be it would not be practical. It wouldn't work the way that we would intend. And so what is being proposed by some in Utah is what is called public trust doctrine, and that's the idea that this water belongs to the public, and therefore the Utah state legislature would be justified in claiming parts of the water rights that farmers have to grow their crops. And so farmers typically actually have water shares that are that come from a larger water right held by a canal company that would but those water rights are still granted by the state of Utah. And so the proposal would just be for the state of Utah to basically rescind the rights that it has already given, or to at least rescind part of it, to say you actually don't have a right to use this water because there is a public trust that we have to fulfill, and we're going to use this to conserve water, and you will not be allowed to use it to grow.
So in other words, you're going to basically pull the rug out from businesses and jobs.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And what my point in the article is saying is that would actually have precisely the opposite effect. And that what we instead need to be doing is to find ways to incentivize conservation, to allow farmers to make conservation profitable for them. And so, to best understand this, you kind of have to understand where these farmers have the right to their water, and that is that they get a share from a canal company, and a company is just a conglomerate of individual property owners, or individual growers, or water users in a regional area, and they have come together and have acquired a right to a large amount or a significant amount of some river's water, or maybe a couple of rivers' water. And what the farmer has is he has a share in that company. And so what I am proposing is that we pursue policies that make those water shares more valuable, make them more worth buying, selling, using carefully, because they're now more valuable. And that is, I think Utah has actually done a really good job in the last couple of years of making that the case. And I think it's going to have a positive effect. I think conservation, we've already seen huge savings in conservation in the last couple of years in Utah. And I think we will only see more.
This is kind of a weird analogy, but it sort of confirms what you're saying. And in the racing world, you have a confederation like NASCAR or F1. And then you have a certain number of licenses. So you basically have to buy in, right? So Michael Andretti, for instance, wants to buy an F1 team. Well, nobody wants to issue him a charter because they all have a pool of money that they take from equally, and no one wants to dilute the amount of money that each team is getting. They don't want to go from $1 million a race to $750,000 a race. It doesn't benefit them to add that other team. Or in NASCAR, if you want to buy, you have to buy the license to be in the team. But, back in the old days of, racing on Daytona Beach, anybody and everybody showed up, and it just didn't have this, a team number didn't have the same value that it does now. And so you have better stewards in IndyCar, F1, and NASCAR because there's value that has been established by these medals, basically. And so people who are team owners aren't fluid or transient. They're deeply invested in the actual success of the sport.
That's right. Yeah. And I think that what you see is that when there's more of an incentive to succeed, in racing, when the winner is going to earn more, there's more of an incentive to commit, to buy in, and the same way with the water. If you own a share of a water share, you actually technically don't own the water, but you have the right to use it and to dispose of it as you will. And though it does have to be beneficial use, which is important, but when that share is valuable, then you're going to be more careful with it. Whereas if there was a threat of the state, that is like the state of Utah, coming in and seizing part of it, then as long as that hasn't happened yet, you actually have an incentive to kind of be reckless with it. And it also it decreases the investment in water conservation generally. There's now less money in owning a share if you know there's a possibility of it coming in and being seized. And so I just want to protect these water shares, these rights, as assets, and to make them something that can be better bought and sold, rather than just like this kind of amorphous, sort of unclear allowance from the state that we're going to let you until we decide you can't anymore. And that to me is troubling. And
because then all of a sudden, well, I literally just I'm batch recording these, and we were talking about a different issue, but it's the same exact principle. If you're a company that at 2% has just planned for 2% inflation, then all of a sudden the government says our new baseline's 4%, then you go, well, they can just change it on me at any time. Why invest? Right?
That's exactly it.
So you need predictability. You need you need kind of the predictability of what you're offering, as opposed to this is ours, let me take it.
Yeah, the stability, that stability is part of the value. And there's already, what's hard is that there's already an incredible amount of instability in this field, in this world, just because we are dependent on weather patterns. We could have a bad year, and we had one, 2 winters ago was a really bad winter, and last winter wasn't much better. And that is already a lot of instability just right there. And what is being proposed for this public trust doctrine is just another layer of instability.
I'm going to have to do this to you. I hate to do it, but I'm going to have to put on my progressive hat here and just say I can't think of anything more unstable than the free market. We're in this situation because of unfettered capitalism, Micah. And I just don't know why you'd want to enshrine generational wealth into the hands of a few people to own the resources of the people. Why would you want to use the power of the government to give the few control over something that we all need?
Well, the whole idea here is that it is water is going to be distributed to where it is needed most. And so I think you'll find that a great deal of farmers are willing and able to lease out their shares when they determine that they don't need it. And this actually is a problem. There is a problem that arises here in that when you make water more of an asset, you then allow conservation. You could allow for conservation by saying you get to keep that asset as if you can lease it out for conservation. And that was just a bill that allowed that here in Utah, was just passed earlier this year. The problem is then who's going to pay for that? Who's going to pay to have that water do nothing, just sit in a stream and go back to the Great Salt Lake? And that is where the state of Utah will come in, and has come in, and was able to pledge something like $40 million, with $40 million in matching funds from private donors, saying the state will now lease water for conservation. And so what I'm actually allowing a great deal for the state, and it's actually a great testament to Utah's fiscal responsibility, balanced budget year after year. This year they're looking at running a $3.3 billion surplus because they balance a budget every year. And some of that money will be able to go to farmers, to shareholders, to conserve water. And yeah, it is going to these holders of these wealthy wealthy holders of these water rights holders. I put wealthy in quotes because many of them they're just farmers who have families farmed on this land for generations. They may be wealthy, but they're cash poor. I'll tell you that. So there is a place for the state to come in, and the state of Utah is doing it, and I applaud them for it.
I know our conception of a farmer now, or one of these folks, is Yellowstone. I got my own helicopter, which is not the case. All right. Well, thank you so much for kind of, is there anything that I missed maybe from the article that we didn't cover that you want to touch on really quickly?
Well, I think just that this is unfortunately becoming increasing almost like a partisan issue, where it because farmers and agriculture, the support for agriculture does tend to come from one side of the political spectrum, in Utah, and I think throughout the West. And there's kind of and it is the side that often opposes the kind of intrusive government practice that you see in this public trust doctrine. But I think one of my hopes for this article was that it would point out that it may feel good to punish. It may feel good to punish these farmers by taking away something that's so important to them, like their water, and giving it to the Great Salt Lake. But I actually think that it wouldn't even work. It wouldn't even work because that water is still running through a ditch on their farm. And unless you're going to have agents of the state at every farm, at every ditch, at every valve.
Oops, my dynamite just went off.
Yeah. You are not going to be able to enforce something like this. It's not going to be enforceable. And others to be, and when you basically make these threats that it will be made illegal to use it, you're actually taking away the incentive they have to conserve out of their own free will and choice. So,
all right, Micah, shameless self-promotion time. Where can people follow you if they want to know more about this topic?
Sure. I mean, you can follow me on Twitter, Micah, M-I-C-A-H, R, Safsten, S-A-F-S-T-E-N, just at Micah R. Safsten on Twitter. And I post, what I write about, mostly issues related to my home state of Utah and water in the West. So,
all right, very good. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. It was fun.
And thank you, dear listener, for being a part of the show. If you learned something, and I know you did because I learned something, then please share it with your friends. That is the best way to help any podcast that you love grow. And we are guessing if you got to the end of the podcast, you love us. So please give us a share. We really do appreciate it. Word of mouth is huge. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you again next time.